Jody Dean has driven up, to her great credit, only arrived at about 5:45 at my place, from Geneva, New York, where she teaches at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. You will know her, I'm sure, as one of the foremost political theorists, media theorists, feminist theorists on the American left, and we might even say the world left today. Her theory of communicative capitalism, examining the way in which we see a online gluing together convergence of democracy and neoliberalism, has been extremely influential, examining that fusion that occurs through cyberspace, if you like. She's published a number of times in the Register. I'm proud to say that I think the roots of her very important book, Crowds and Party, I see traces of it in the essay she wrote on Occupy in the Socialist Register. Of course, before that, she had done a marvelous book on the Communist Horizon. And I remember thinking when I first encountered Jody and heard her speak of how brave it was for someone in the second decade of the 21st century in the United States.
Trump's America, too.
Before Trump's America, this was still under Obama, to speak so courageously and passionately on the need for rehabilitating communism in the 21st century and rehabilitating the notion of the Communist Party in the 21st century.
So,
Jody Dean.
Oh, thanks. Can y'all hear me all right? Yeah. So, like Leah said, I don't have a piece in the current volume on Rethinking Democracy. I had a piece in the previous one, Rethinking Revolution. And like Ian, I was totally, I was completely excited to be invited. I'd done one a couple of years before, because as a graduate student, I would look at the issues of the journal and get a real sense like, this is where the debates that matter happen. Right? This is the place where there is really politics going on. This is what it means to be a contemporary socialist. So I'm just totally excited to be part of these conversations now. And I really look forward to reading the new volume, and I keep telling them I really want to get a copy while I'm here. More specifically, I'm interested in reading the new issue of Socialist Register because I think it might help me rethink democracy, maybe. For the most part, I am skeptical about the value of democracy as an ideal for the left. That is, for the revolutionary socialist and communist, for a left committed to the abolition of capitalism and the installation of a mode of production anchored in meeting social needs rather than in private capital accumulation. Now, I expect that there's a degree to which everybody here agrees, right? If billionaires, no democracy. There is no democracy if our lives are determined by market forces and speculation. That's what makes us socialist and communists. To use Lenin's terms, such a democracy with billionaires is nothing but the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. So my point here is not anti-democratic. It's about whether democracy can name a division adequate to a revolutionary anti-capitalist politics. It's about whether democracy names an alternative to what the dominant ideology tells us we have. I don't think it can, but I'm ready to rethink this and looking forward to reading the volume to help with this rethinking. So, since I haven't read the volume yet, though, I'll tell you more about why I think democracy is inadequate as a socialist politics and insufficient as a name for socialist vision. 1, democracy does not name a split or antagonism. Virtually no one is openly opposed to democracy. In the US, the right presents itself as democratic. George W. Bush invaded Iraq and Afghanistan in the name of democracy. Trump declared that with his election, power had returned to the people. So democracy does not name the division between us and those whom we oppose. 2nd, democracy points to processes rather than substance. Whether one has in mind electoral, deliberative, or radical democracy, the focus is on how politics occurs rather than on what kinds of political outcomes one wants to achieve. It's over self-governance
And those who prioritize democracy take this self-governance to be the primary goal, right? They don't take the primary goal to be ending economic inequality, exploitation, and private property. And so this is the problem I have with Dennis's chapter, and I hope we can take this up in the discussion. But from the way I read it, Dennis treats working class struggle as democratic struggle. So he doesn't just say that the struggle of the working class had democratic effects. He omits the economic demands and achievements and presents them as if they were purely democratic, as if self-governance were the exclusive and primary goal, rather than, say, eliminating the capitalist capacity to determine the conditions of labor. The horizon of his chapter, then, is democracy. He advocates collective action to achieve and defend democracy, which he presents as a relationship among people for their own self-governance. He presents democracy as an end. Class struggle in the way the chapter is set up is just a means to that end. And the abolition of capitalism, imperialism, property, and the wage don't appear at all. I don't think that's a communist position, and I don't think it's adequate as a socialist one. 3, in today's networks of personalized media and communication, democracy has merged with capitalism. And as Leah mentioned, I call this communicative capitalism. The primary values of communicative capitalism are inclusion, participation, transparency, and access. Communicative capitalism materializes and repurposes democratic aspirations in ways that intensify inequality and entrench the hold of capitalist state power. The proliferation, distribution, acceleration, and intensification of communicative access produces a deadlocked democracy incapable of serving as a forum for progressive political and economic change. And I can say more about this during the discussion, but some of the reasons for this deadlock include the change in communication such that its exchange value matters more than its use value. There's a change from the utterance that has meaning to the contribution that it circulates, right? So we don't count, things on Twitter. It's like, how many retweets did you get, or how many shares on Facebook, how many people liked it. It doesn't matter what it is, right? It's just the amount. So that the meaning is insignificant, but the circulation value takes, and the circulation value takes priority. Another reason for the deadlock, the democratic deadlock that we get under communicative capitalism, involves the basic structure of complex networks. And these are networks characterized by free choice, growth, and preferential attachment, and they result in winner-take-all, or the primacy of the one over the many distributions. I can say more about that in the discussion if people want. 4, so this is the 4th reason democracy is inadequate. To argue for democracy today is to argue for more of the same. Right? Democracy names our milieu, our ideology of multiple voices and opinions all being shared in a giant cacophony of inclusion. It doesn't cut through these to advocate for some views rather than others. And this is why democracy remains popular for a left that's become liberal and inchoate since 1989. Democracy is an ideal that's so broad no one rejects it, so we risk nothing by advocating it. Keep in mind, the economic inequality that has increased so dramatically in the last 30 years of neoliberalism emerged in democratic societies through democratic processes. The laws and procedures that have governed US elections for decades gave us Trump, right? It wasn't the Russians. 5, democracy as an ideal, whereas the name of our vision occludes class struggle. When we use democracy to name our ideal, we somehow assume the equality of participants. And under capitalism, that's a fantasy or delusion. The rich, the owners, the 1% have more economic and political power than the rest of us. We need to begin from the fact of the struggle between labor and capital, few and many, exploited and exploiter, oppressed and oppressor. And rather than imagining democratic relations between them, and rather than presenting the battle between them as a battle over democracy, rather than a struggle over the basic structure of economy and society, we need to overthrow the oppressors and abolish the systems of exploitation. 6, one last reason democracy is inadequate as a socialist ideal. we can't get where we need to be through democratic means. That is, through the established channels of democratic societies. According to a now somewhat dated 2016 Global Wealth Report, the bottom half of the world's population owns less than 1% of total wealth. The top 10% own 89% of global wealth. Does anybody think the top 10% is going to say, okay, you guys voted, we're going to cooperate now, right? Democracy does not name a politics capable of demolishing this. Communism does. Communism asserts that as long as there is capitalism, private property, and the wage, there can be no democracy. There's no democracy for the homeless, the incarcerated, the refugees, the destitute, and the overworked. Communism names a positive vision of the alternative to this capitalist democracy, from each according to ability to each according to need. So these are some of the reasons I'm skeptical of democracy as the name for socialist politics, but still very much looking forward to rethinking democracy with the Socialist Register. Now, that this rethinking is being carried out with and through the Socialist Register means a lot, right? This isn't just like some kind of academic journal. The goals of the Socialist Register are not like a neutral evaluation of scholarly research articles. They're political, about political struggle and political vision. The debates over revolution and democracy are debates over what should be done, how we should do it, and the principles that matter, right? They're debates over our vision and our strategy. Like historical materialism itself, the gaze of the journal is forward-looking, like futural. Historical accounts aren't for their own sake, right, or for the sake of the discipline of history. They're meant as lessons and guideposts. Ways of thinking that can let us learn and do better next time. And I think sometimes leftists forget this and get bogged down in lessons of the past as if these lessons tell us exactly what will happen. As if history were completely determining and there is no alternative, right? Thatcher's neoliberal slogan sneaking in the back door. Sometimes we also tend to confuse or blur academic and political work, right, taking the perspective of the academy toward our thinking and writing, rather than, say, taking the futural perspective of revolution held by the party. And these would be errors, right? As socialists and communists, we need to look at the past for guidance, even as the future should determine how we operationalize this guidance, right? How we turn it to strategy and tactics, practices and slogans. Now, Ian is also guided by the future in his chapter, and as he makes suggestions for the next left. He suggests that we draw from liberal democratic theory, that we appeal to an expanded property right, individualism, and the middle class. This repeats the mistakes the left has been making for the last 40 years, racing toward a center that moves perpetually rightward, reiterating the terms of the dominant power, and failing to establish the difference between us and our opponents. A socialism expressed in terms of property, individualism, and the middle class is nothing but liberal democracy. McKay even adds an additional liberal buzzword, inclusivity, including the fact that working and unemployed people have always been included under capitalism, right? They're included via exploitation, which is what communists aim to abolish. In my contribution to the 2017 Socialist Register, right, the Rethinking Revolution one, I discuss Lenin's vision of the future as it determines action in his present, right? It's the future of revolution. And I emphasize the role of this future of revolution as it guides the party, and the importance of the party as a body for carrying and forwarding this revolutionary future. The future exercises a coordinating capacity in the party. Tactics, strategies, slogans, and decisions all come from the future. To advocate for the party is thus not the same as advocating for collective action or more democracy in general. It's to advocate for the building of and a commitment to a fighting force, a divisive force of struggle for and against a line, a platform, a specific vision of society. I expect most of you probably recall that Lenin described the dictatorship of the proletariat as an immense expansion of democracy, with the dictatorship of the proletariat, democracy for the first time becomes, quote, democracy for the poor, democracy for the people, and not democracy for the money bags, end quote. Wresting power and wealth concentrated in the hands of the few requires more than inclusion and more than the extension of democracy. It requires the restriction and exclusion of democracy as well. Right? Oppressors, exploiters, and capitalists must be suppressed. Their capacities to oppress and exploit eliminated. I'm going to conclude by noting 3 current paths in the US. I don't know if the same applies to Canada. And the 3 different futures that guide them. So one path is, the first one would be, we could call change the players. And for this one, the struggle is over the Democratic Party with the idea that new players, particularly women, will make the difference that matters. The vision of the future for this first path of change the players is basically more of the same, right? More of the same US capitalism and imperialism, but with a human face. The second version is add more players. Here, the struggle is over the electoral political system with the idea that a third electoral party, a progressive party or Labor Party, perhaps with Bernie Sanders at its head, will make the difference that matters. That'll end the lock of the corrupt two-party system. The vision of the future in the second version is a bit vaguer here, but we can say that it derives from the belief that the structural features of US capitalist democracy are basically sound, that elections can work, that government can work, and that it's just a matter of getting better people in place. The third version would be change the game. And in this third version, the view of the future ahead is revolutionary, a vision that extends out of our current civil war, dysfunctional political system, declining life expectancy, massive gun violence and opioid addiction, amplified and expropriative inequality, debt, and then, of course, climate change. In this version, revolution is on the agenda. The political question is which way it would go. The political question involves building the knowledge, power, and conviction strong enough to push this revolution that's on the horizon in a communist direction.